This podcast is sponsored by Orchid Live. Orchid Live is a specialist occupational health software used by a number of SOM members to run every aspect of their occupational health operations. They hold healthcare records for over 1 million UK workers and work with both in-house OH teams and OH providers. You can find out more at orchidlive.com.
My name is Amy McKeown and I am joined by the wonderful Carolyn Harris MP, who I met recently at an event she was hosting at the Houses of Parliament for the APPG of Menopause and International Women's Day. So Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us for this special podcast.
My pleasure.
Shall we start by explaining a little bit about the event that we were at that you kindly hosted it for?
Yeah, it was an International Women's Day event and we very much wanted to put the emphasis on keeping women in work and how important it is to keep women in work and what we can do, what we are doing and what we should be doing to make sure that women in work have the right kind of services and support to stay in work.
So this was a celebration of International Women's Day. The topic in question was menopause. So you've been chair of the All-Parliamentary Group for Menopause for 5 years now. So have you seen big changes in that time? And what made you do it in the first place?
Yeah, there have been big changes. 2021 when the group was formed, but the campaign on menopause and getting menopause as a topic that we can discuss openly, freely and willingly goes back to 2018. That's when I first started talking about menopause in the House of Commons. Two big things happened in 2021. One, we were able to get the APPG, All-Party Parliamentary Group, off the ground. And secondly, I had a private member's bill. The first thing I wanted to do was to make menopause training mandatory for doctors and medical profession. But we discovered that medical schools are private entities, so you can't make them do anything.
And they don't cover menopause in medical training.
We've done a bit of research and we've discovered that approximately 41% of medical schools have not got menopause on the curriculum. So that means that when women go, and I was one of those women who went with these specific symptoms, for me it was anxiety, depression, mental health, and ended up on antidepressant. So when a woman goes and has that conversation, or anyone goes and has that conversation, in that time you got with the doctor, you were prioritising what is your worst thing. For me, it was the anxiety, depression. For other women, it very often problems with their limbs and their joints. But you end up on that pathway, which the doctor recognised, oh yeah, well that's going to be fibromyalgia. Oh yeah, that's going to be anxiety. And you end up on that medication.
Oh, hang on, I'm just still trying to get over the fact that 41% of medical schools don't cover something that 51% of the population go through.
And the medical schools that do cover it, they do anything between 15 minutes to 2 hours in a lecture.
Yeah.
So doctor should be able to say, oh, you got low mood. How is your libido? Have you got reduced concentration? But they don't, because they don't know the consequences of menopause. So what happens is women get put on a pathway which is not relevant. And in the time that they are doing it, you wouldn't even read out those symptoms.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So it just means that this is all part of the problem about women's health being badly serviced. So if you haven't got a situation where the person who is prescribing and diagnosis doesn't understand the problem, and you as a woman have never really thought about, I could be menopausal, I could be perimenopausal, because you have never been taught or never heard, or it's never been an issue because nobody ever talks about it. It's a taboo subject. Then you're not going to know you're menopausal. And I was one of those women that went 8 years on antidepressant, 8 years, not knowing I was menopausal. And it was only from talking to other women after I started talking about menopause, and I've made umpteen speeches where I said that I was really lucky because I hadn't had any symptoms at all, not knowing that I was knee-deep in symptoms because I didn't know the symptoms.
Yeah.
So anyway, private members bill, we wanted to be able to raise awareness of menopause. So we thought about doctors training, discovered we couldn't do anything on that. Then the second thing we thought of was we like to introduce workplace policies so that every employer has got to have a policy which recognises menopause and what they need to do. when we started looking at that, we realised that no two workplaces is the same, no two women are the same, no two menopause is the same.
Yep.
So there isn't one set of rigid rules that you can adapt to make a policy. It has to be more flexible. We couldn't legislate for a framework. You've got to have something specific to legislate on. We wanted to bring awareness. So if the UK Parliament is suddenly legislating on menopause in some way, shape or form, it brings attention to it. And
Yep.
where we landed was, I live in Wales. A little bit of research, we realised that people living in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland don't pay for prescriptions. People living in England do. So that meant that women in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, they were not paying for their hormone replacement therapy, whereas women in England were. And with a cost of approximately £10 an item, and I don't know if you realise this, but if you're on HRT medication, which has got more than one hormone, for example, the dual pill, where you have progesterone and estrogen in the same product, you pay two products, even though it's one item. So you pay £20, not £10. So we're trying to get the government of the day to introduce free hormone replacement therapy for women in England, which they wouldn't do. Then we tried to get them to at least introduce a one payment for the two items. But eventually we managed to convince them to introduce a prepayment certificate, which for the cost of two items a year, women in England now get all their HRT for the year for that price. So that was the first thing we done. And then straight on the back of that, we managed to get the APPG up and running, the All-Party Parliamentary Group. And the other thing that we managed to get out of the legislation was the Menopause Task Force, which doesn't exist anymore because it ended up as a talking shop. But we started off, I wanted commitment from the then government that every area, every department across Whitehall would be looking at menopause in connection with any policy and any strategies and, in all areas of their work, menopause featured. And that's worked to a certain extent because now the DWP think about menopause. From stuff that we do around women's prisons, justice think about menopause. Business, Department of Business and Trade think about menopause because so many women end up leaving work because of menopause symptoms. So we are at a point where we have government departments, so Whitehall departments, who are now actually aware that whatever they do, they need to bear in mind menopause will have this consequence or this will have that consequence on menopause.
Well, that's huge work. I mean, the fact that we've now got coming into into the legislation next year, menopause as part of the action plans that need to go. So from that standing start to where we are now, and actually one of the things I do is I'm on the committee for the BSI standard, menstruation and menopause in the workplace, which is now becoming an ISO standard. So I've helped a lot of organisations look at this. So you must be really proud of that in 5 years.
Yeah, I am. I worked closely in opposition. I worked with, it was Annalisa Dodds there on writing that legislation that would make sure that there was a framework within. I mean, where we are now with what's coming in the legislation is that employers with over 250 employees must have a framework. There must be an acknowledgement. I wasn't very happy in the beginning when we had a limit of 250. I understand why they done it. So what I say to businesses now is, if you were a business of 250, you will have a supply chain to you. Then you should be bringing them in on your framework, and just like a modern slavery policy, and insisting that all your suppliers are compliant on modern slavery legislation. Make sure that that supplier recognises that women in work are precious and that they adopt or follow or certainly try to emulate the policy or the framework of a bigger company, which they are feeding into. So it's sharing good practice then, isn't it?
Yeah, and as you said before, no two menopauses are the same, but
No.
also no two workforces are the same. So what I really like about the menopause action plans and the gender pay gap action plans, it's finding things that are suitable for your demographics and your workplace and then implementing those. I mean, and you probably know better than me that the reason that this is so important is the number of women that are leaving the workforce in and around menopause.
1 in 10 give up work, 4 in 10 reduce their hours, and a really high percentage of women do not take promotion because they are frightened that they won't be able to hack it. And the consequences for that are that talent is lost from the workplace. But for those people who are actually on maybe a standard income, shall we say, they're not actually boardroom level. They're just somebody doing a normal job with normal pay. If they've not got that pay coming in, or they haven't got that level of pay coming in, consequences are they will end up on some type of benefit. If you end up on a benefit, you won't pay enough national insurance to qualify for a full state pension. So by the time you get the full state pension age, you're only going to be on the lower rate, which means you're going to be eligible for pension credit. So you're constantly in a situation where you are claiming some kind of supplementary benefit in order for you to live your normal life. Also add to that, how many women are actually out of work or on long-term sick with mental health issues when they're actually menopausal?
Well, and I looked at this because we've got, as you know, preaching to the converted, more people out of the workforce with mental health than ever before. And the two demographics are young people between the ages of about 16 and 24. A lot of those are men, but also women who are older, and gynecological waiting lists are much longer for older women, but also mental health conditions for that as well.
But a lot of those will be hormonal.
Yes.
A couple of years ago, I made a really bold statement. I say a lot of things.
Can't imagine you making a bold statement,
I
Carolyn.
feel a bit like Trump here, but I made this statement and I said that I was convinced that if doctors were to look at their case notes and they were to look at the cohort of their patients who were roughly the same age, women with roughly the same symptoms, they would find that they prescribed antidepressants more often than HRT. And this doctor said, I don't think that's true, but I will do a survey.
So you've just said something really key, which is that it's mental health conditions. So I made a comment at the event that you hosted about the fact that private health insurance, for those that have it, and we know a lot of people don't, doesn't cover menopause. So actually, if you do have private health insurance and you've got any of those symptoms, the 40 symptoms that you've listed, in order to get referred on, you can't have anything to do with menopause. And one of the ladies who came up to speak to me was a clinical psychologist who says that she has lots of women who are clearly menopausal coming to see her, but in order to get whatever health insurance to pay for the treatment, they have to say things like acute anxiety or mental health conditions, which can then mean that those same women aren't eligible for life insurance, or that there's a detrimental impact to them in terms of stigma on their career because they can't say menopause in order to get the treatment. So there's two things here. Health insurance doesn't cover it, but you've also...
Well, you can't pay a premium, you can pay extra. So some employers actually pay extra to include menopause. But I mean, I've spoken to private medical companies, and one of them did say to me, quite frankly, that they were finding themselves paying out extortionate amounts of money on claims for women to see individual specialists until at the end of the line, they were suddenly realizing this woman was menopausal. So for me, it's a no-brainer. They need to be included in the basic package.
Cover it in the package and teach doctors at medical school to recognise it, which then...
The teaching the doctors thing may get better, because one of the other things we've managed to do is, in England, is introduce the 40-plus health check. Women are proactively called to their GP at 40 or thereabouts to have a conversation about, and it's a simple conversation about how are your periods. If you don't ask the question, but it means that doctors have to understand the menopause to be able to ask the questions. So they're having to up their game on that.
That's brilliant. I think, I'm 45 now, so I remember getting called in for one. But then I guess the key point for the podcast then is there's a really big role for occupational health. If we're talking about managing menopause at work, then what do you see occupational health being able to do to support this?
So one of the things I've been pushing for certainly since this government come in, and I am knocking at an open door, is that we should be giving occupational health therapists menopause training, so that they understand those 40 symptoms. So when you have someone who's in work, and I would also like to see occupational health therapists working within the benefit. So if someone is out of work and needs to be back in work, or would like to be back in work, or we think they should be back in work, then you can have a conversation a little bit like you should be having with your doctor, which says, have you thought that the fact you've got a bit of brain fog, you're forgetting things. The fact that there's been changes to your periods, the fact that you've talked to me about joint pain and anxiety, that I suspect you could be perimenopausal. And that conversation could happen when they're starting to go off on the sick, or whether they're off on the sick and you're having that conversation about potentially coming back or adaptations. And people talk about adaptations as if you're going to have to move down walls.
Yeah, no, it's like this is bread and butter for occupational health.
No.
Reasonable adjustments at work,
Yeah. Things
changing hours, cost
Yeah.
uniforms, all sorts.
Flexible working, sitting by a window, air conditioning on, fans. There's everybody's different.
Yeah, I once chaired a lady called Natalie Beresford, who was a very senior police officer who's talked a lot about this. And she was talking about, and I thought this was brilliant, she brought into the police forces, if she had brain fog, and she was very senior, so she was commanding gold operations, that if she felt like she couldn't manage it fully that day, she'd say red, orange, green. So red was, I just don't feel I'm able to do this.
Yeah.
Orange is I am, but I want someone next to me to check my decisions because this is really important. And green is I think it's great. So what a brilliant intervention. That's so simple.
I always remember doing way back in the early days of us talking about this. I did a radio phone in about menopause, and a woman phoned to say she's an airline pilot and she was due to fly this particular day, and it was a red day for her, should we say. She just didn't feel comfortable that she was going to be in charge of the flight. So she told her boss, look, I'm really not up to this today. So they took her off flying missions, put her on working in simulators, training other people. Eventually, they got rid of her. When she went to the job centre, they offered her a job as a travel agent because obviously she knew all about travel as she was an airline pilot. I mean, come on.
But also, this is the point. It's not that you can't do it. It's that for a period of time, your brain, every cell of your body is resetting to live without estrogen.
And it's about acknowledging that with a little bit of support, not help, support. I always like to think of it as a bit of dignity, giving that individual an opportunity to make decisions about what's best for her that allows her to stay in work and to be a really productive member of any workforce.
Which is exactly where occupational health can help.
Always, every time.
And as a final point then, so obviously Society of Occupational Medicine, we've talked about occupational health, learning more about this, but the role that they can play in the workplace. What else can the society or us within it do to help you in your mission, Carolyn?
I mean, just support our asks, really. So if you work for a company that hasn't yet got a policy or framework, find out why not. I would always encourage workplace ambassadors so that there is a person there who has the knowledge. Maybe they've had the training and they can be the conduit to get the information up to the line managers and occupational health therapists so that people could do that really easily. And women, keep sharing and keep talking. Talking to each other is so important. You would be absolutely astounded how many women only learn about the menopause from talking to other women and not from any medical profession. That is something we know what we know, share what we know, and support each other.
Well, listen, thank you so much. Firstly, for coming on this podcast. Secondly, for all of the work you've done. And quite honestly, how far we've come in 5 years is incredible. So let's see where we are in the next 5. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
This podcast is sponsored by Orchid Live. Orchid Live is a specialist occupational health software used by a number of SOM members to run every aspect of their occupational health operations. They hold healthcare records for over 1 million UK workers and work with both in-house OH teams and OH providers. You can find out more at orchidlive.com.